Babylon is not the kind of anime that we are used to getting. A relatively down-to-earth setting inhabited by a cast of mature, adult characters. An intricate, winding narrative with twists and turns at every corner. Sleek character designs that exude a strong personality not only for the characters, but for the show as a whole. Strong visual direction that never fails to communicate the message that it's going for. A plethora of interesting shots that clearly have a deeper meaning than being mere gimmicks. A stylish soundtrack that blends piano with trap music seamlessly. The list of impressive things about this show is endless. However, throughout the course of this video, I will endeavour to explain the core appeal of Babylon. Let's begin. I want to start by discussing the actual premise of Babylon, and why I think that it's absolutely brilliant. Babylon revolves around Shiniki City, a city that has been created for the sole purpose of being a testing ground for nations. The most important point to take from this is that any law can be passed in this city, as a sort of test to see how that law would function in a real city. The story starts in the midst of an election for the mayorship of this city, with the eventual winner being Kaika Itsuki. I'm trying to keep the plot summary to a minimum. Itsuki's first act as mayor is to legalize all suicide. This is a move that not only surprises Zen Seizaki, the main character and public affairs investigator, but even Itsuki's supporters. Upon legalizing suicide, 60 or so civilians throw themselves off of the top of a building, in a scene that I can only describe as outstanding. The music, the visual direction, every aspect of the production serves to bolster the tremendous weight that the events of this scene carry. At this point, any doubts as to the quality of the show should have been dispelled. The suicide of these people elevates the narrative stakes to a much higher level, as you know that if Seizaki fails to find compelling evidence that Itsuki had a direct hand in causing all of these suicides, more and more people will commit suicide. Now that we have the general premise established, let's dive into how the show actually capitalizes on such an interesting premise. Kaika Itsuki and Zen Seizaki's ideological conflict is what really drives most of the narrative. Itsuki believes that the act of suicide is not only just, but can also have a positive effect on society as a whole. Before I begin to unpack the nuances of this ideology, it's important to establish Seizaki's general ideology and beliefs on the same subject. Seizaki is about as stereotypically righteous as one could get. He's a strong advocate for justice and condemns acts of evil. Naturally, he strongly opposes Itsuki's newly introduced suicide law on an ideological level. This clash in ideals between Itsuki and Seizaki is one of the most interesting parts of Babylon. As a viewer of this show, I would assume that you are a member of a functional society. If this is indeed the case, then I would expect that you would have had a similar reaction to Seizaki. The general consensus in any functional society is that death is a bad thing, and Babylon functions under the assumption that this is the case. So it endeavours to make you question your beliefs when it comes to suicide at every turn. This is where the nuances of Itsuki's ideology come into play. Itsuki strongly opposes the idea that one must live because they were born. He objects to society teaching us that we have to live from a young age by way of things such as law, religion, and morality. Itsuki takes his beliefs to the logical extreme. He finds the notion that everyone should continue living even if they have no purpose in life to be foolish. He believes that this type of thinking will ultimately lead to the fall of mankind. He wants to enter a new age, an age in which the value of death is recognized by society and not avoided as it currently is. At a surface level, this type of thinking is clearly wrong on a moral level, but if you entertain what he is saying and think about it, discarding any biases that you may have, his beliefs start to make more sense. It is no secret that overpopulation is a pressing issue on a global scale and will become more and more of an issue in the future. So, theoretically, if Itsuki's suicide law was implemented on an international scale, it could help to combat overpopulation, as many people considering suicide may see it being legal as a catalyst for them to finally commit the act themselves. And if an increase in suicides is still seen as a negative thing, despite its potential for good, Itsuki also argues that legalizing suicide may actually decrease the number of suicides that occur. His argument for this is that suicide is seen as a form of running away in Japanese society, so to legalize it would merely be making the act of suicide a choice that an individual is free to choose if they feel the need to. There are plenty of examples of marijuana being legalized in countries, for example, and this legalization actually leading to a decrease in the amount of users of the drug. Much like the prohibition of marijuana being counterproductive, the prohibition of suicide only serves to make it a more tempting option. One of the most interesting parts of Itsuki's ideology is the way that Babylon actually presents it. The show feels as though it is being completely unbiased. Itsuki actually presents his beliefs in a much more convincing way than Seizaki and any of his other detractors, which serves to level the playing field as, after all, he is only one man up against the vast majority of society. His ideology is not only easily palatable, but also rather convincing when you remove any biases that you may have from living in a society. I believe that this is one of the areas that Babylon shines the most brightly in. Not only is it able to present a plethora of interesting ideologies and arguments that support them, but it also presents these ideologies in a very respectful and thought-provoking way. I can't imagine anything worse than if Babylon had tried to clearly place Seizaki and Itsuki's detractors on a moral high ground in the conflict. It would have felt rather preachy, but no, Babylon provides us with a genuine argument for a pro-suicide law and leaves us to come to our own conclusions. Now that I have discussed the core ideological conflict of Babylon and how the show handles it, I want to begin to discuss one of my absolute favourite aspects of the show, its visual direction. Babylon's director, Kiyotaka Suzuki, has most notably previously worked on Psycho-Pass's second season, which, needless to say, is abysmal in every regard. But rejoice, as it would seem that he has turned over a new leaf for Babylon. A scene that truly exemplifies the impeccable direction in this show is the interrogation scene. This scene depicts Seizaki's interrogation of Magase Ai, who at this point in the show is more of a mysterious figure than anything. This interrogation is the audience's first real introduction to the character who would ultimately become Babylon's main antagonist. So as well as the writing having to sell her as a threatening character, so did Suzuki's direction of the scene. Before I begin to analyse the directorial techniques that Suzuki employed throughout the course of this scene, I want to make it clear that I will not be discussing anything to do with Magase Ai's character past episode 2. This is because at the time of writing this, it has been announced that episode 8 will be delayed until the 30th of December, and I wanted to get this out to try and sell people on the show before it returns. It also wouldn't be fair to discuss her character when she still hasn't been fleshed out to a satisfying degree, which I expect she will be in the future. Now, onto the interrogation scene. To start, I want to talk about the way that this scene plays around with the concept of time in a way that is very reminiscent of a Satoshi Kon film. In the first section of the interrogation, Seizaki is asking Magase questions and she is responding. However, the way that this is presented makes it immediately more interesting than two characters merely conversing over a table. Seizaki is shown asking his questions in the interrogation room, with a rather wide aspect ratio being used, whereas Magase's answers to the questions are shown in a completely different location, the location that she's being questioned about, in a 4:3 aspect ratio. The change in aspect ratio serves to show the audience that the shots of Magase in the separate location are from the past. The fact that 4:3 is an older aspect ratio should make this clear. Magase answering the questions from a separate location serves to play with the concept of time, which is very in line with Magase's character, seeming as she is skilled at getting into the heads of others. This scene is presented in such a way that it seems as though the characters are communicating across time and space. There are also plenty of creative transitions that blend what are otherwise two very different shots together. This leads to the scene feeling very brisk and easy to watch. The scene consists of two characters talking, so the visual direction needed to be as entertaining as possible. In a show of much less impressive visual direction, Sword Art Online for example, the characters would merely be sitting at a table while the camera desperately searches for new angles to shoot them from. What this does is make for an incredibly uninspired scene on a visual level. I'm incredibly thankful that this was not the case for Babylon. The Monogatari series also does a fantastic job of keeping scenes consisting entirely of dialogue as entertaining as possible, courtesy of Akiyuki Shimbo's boundless creativity. Allow me to now go through some shots and sequences from this scene that I find to be excellently crafted. In this sequence, Magase has begun to take control of the conversation. The way that this is presented visually is with a dolly zoom shot. This kind of shot usually focuses on a single person in the center of the shot, while the camera physically moves towards them and the camera zooms out at the same time to make it appear as though the background is moving further away. This shot from Jaws is perhaps the most famous use of the shot. What having the shot in this scene achieves is making Magase's presence feel as overpowering as possible, as she is moving towards you while you can do little about it. The next shot in the sequence is especially creative. It starts with a profile shot of Seizaki before Magase forcefully enters the shot. This represents the way that Magase is trying to force herself onto him in the conversation, and also that the questions that she is asking him are questions that will lead her to know him better, thus getting closer to him. The scene then harshly cuts to a wide shot of both of the characters sitting at opposite ends of the table, showing that her getting this close to him really was due to her aptitude with getting into the heads of others. You could cut the dialogue out of this scene entirely and still know exactly what was happening. The visual direction really is that good. Throughout the course of this part of the interrogation scene, Magase is asking Seizaki questions in an attempt to understand his ideals and general way of thinking. She puts words in his mouth and just generally causes him to contradict himself. Seizaki consistently fails to understand the points that she is making, as he is a man of justice and morally pure ideals. A fantastic shot that represents what I have said is the shot in which the screen is split in half and Magase's head is placed on top of Seizaki's body. This is a very peculiar shot that I have not seen before. This shot is clearly trying to visually represent the idea of talking over someone's head, which is an idiom meaning to talk in such a way that the other member of the conversation is unable to understand or comprehend what you are saying. This shot then shows us Magase quite literally talking over Seizaki's head. Is this subtle? Absolutely not. But it really didn't need to be. What it needed to do was immediately and effectively clue the audience into the nature of this conversation, and it definitely achieved that. So, to keep this video as spoiler-free as possible, I'm going to end it here. I sincerely hope that if you are yet to watch Babylon, this video has convinced you to give it a go. And if you are already watching it, I hope that I have helped you to recognize some of its greatest aspects, and more importantly than anything, have successfully explained the appeal of Babylon. Thank you for watching.